to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
You will hear adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And Paranormal Expeditions.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. Oh, and you just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by the Country Tavern, home of wicked good food and spirits. It's also featured in our main story, but has nothing to do with the 5 minutes that you're about to spend right now.
Inspector Delafield.
Yes, are you Miss Garnett?
Yes, I'm so glad you've come, Inspector. It's my sister. She's been murdered.
Oh, try to compose yourself, Miss Garnett. Hysterics don't help in cases like this.
I know, but I've been waiting for nearly an hour and... Well, this way, Inspector. My sister's body is here in the parlor.
Yeah. Let me see. The bullet pierced her heart. Miss Garnett, suppose you tell me what you know.
But I know nothing, Inspector. It's Walter who can tell you. He was here. He ran out after the murderer.
May I ask the identity of this man, Walter?
Walter Benson, my sister's husband. They were separated, have been for a year. Since Ethel left him, she and I have been living here in this country cottage.
Now, suppose you tell me the story in its proper order, Miss Garnett. Exactly what happened.
Well, Ethel was here and I was upstairs. I heard loud talking, then a shot. I came to the head of the staircase. Walter was coming in the front door and said the murderer had escaped through the back hall. Walter went out after him. In the parlor, I found Ethel. Like this.
I see.
Agnes, where are you?
It's Walter. He's come back. I'm here, Walter, in the parlor.
Is Ethel hurt badly?
Walter, Ethel is dead. This is Inspector Delafield.
Oh, here, Mr. Benson. You better sit down. It looks like you're all in.
Oh, I am. I chased him all the way to the Valley Road. He had a car there parked in a clump of trees. He got away.
Who was this man, Mr. Benson?
I don't know. I never got a good look at his face.
When did you first see him?
Well, I came to see Ethel this afternoon. I was standing on the stoop about to ring the bell, and then I heard the man's voice. He was very angry. I stepped off the stoop, went around to the parlor window. That window there. I stepped under the climbing rose bush and looked in. He was standing with his back to me. Then he fired.
What did you do then?
I ran to the front door. It was unlocked. I threw it open and saw him disappearing down the back hall.
Mr. Benson, those scratches on your hand, how did you come by those?
Why, from the rose bush, I suppose. The thorns when I was looking in the window.
Mr. Benson, is that the climbing rose bush out there, the one you spoke of?
Why, yes, of course it is.
Through the pane here, it looks like a Zephyrine Druin. Pink blossoms, climbing variety.
Inspector, my sister's murder is escaping, and you give us a dissertation on roses.
Yes, Miss Garnett, because the rose bush tells me this man is lying. He is the murderer of Ethel Benson.
What was the clue that told Inspector Delafield the truth? Let's see how good a detective you are. In a moment, we'll hear the explanation. But first...
Zephyrine Druin, climbing rose. That has to be a big clue, but I'm darned if I know what it means.
You're right about that. I happen to be a bit of an anthophile. You won't get it unless you know your roses.
Well, can you give us a clue?
Roses are red, violets are blue. Some are pretty, and some will poke you.
Oh, that helps a lot. Let's get back to the story.
And now, a final word of explanation from Inspector Delafield.
Although Walter Benson's story had a ring of truth in it, because of its simplicity, he made one mistake. Later, he confessed that it was he who had argued with Ethel Benson, that in a blind rage he had killed her. It was her fingernails that scratched his hand, not the rose bush. For any amateur flower gardener knows a Zephyrine Druin has no thorns.
Okay, I have to admit your clue was pretty good.
I try to be Johnny on the spot.
Well, that time you were pretty good. Zephyrine Druins have no thorns. This 5-Minute Mystery was brought to you by the Country Tavern, home of wicked good food and spirits.
What's that you say?
Welcome to the podcast. Today we have ghost stories and spend some time in space being afraid of nothing.
That doesn't make sense.
It will, later on. We have a pretty epic story from James that follows a haunting in a restaurant in New Hampshire. This one is so good that I titled this podcast after it. It is called The Country Tavern. A couple weeks ago, I presented a story from the OTR series Buck Rogers. I asked for your feedback on this one via a poll, which can be found on the blog site. At the time of this recording, 17 folks have responded. I've extended the poll until Tuesday, April 20th, so please just take a minute and fill it out. I would greatly appreciate it. I will have a link to it in the show notes. One last thing before we get on with the show. I'm looking for your stories about time slips and lost time events. If you have one of these, please send it to me. I'll be using them on the 500th episode of the program. Thank you. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle. Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So what am I listening to right now? One of my favorite authors is Isaac Asimov. I think I may have read or at least reviewed every book he ever wrote. One of his best, many believe, made him the superstar that he was. I, of course, am referring to IRobot, and it is narrated for us by Scott Brick. This audiobook contains 10 stories of robots gone mad, mind-reading robots, robots with a sense of humor, and robots who secretly run the world. All told with the dramatic blend of science fact and science fiction that became Asimov's trademark. Here is a clip from the book that introduces one of the recurring characters from the stories.
Susan Calvin had been born in the year 1982, they said, which made her 75 now. Everyone knew that. Appropriately enough, U.S. Robot and Mechanical Men Incorporated was 75 also, since it had been in the year of Dr. Calvin's birth that Lawrence Robertson had first taken out incorporation papers for what eventually became the strangest industrial giant in man's history. Well, everyone knew that too. At the age of 20, Susan Calvin had been part of the particular psychomath seminar at which Dr. Alfred Lanning of U.S. Robots had demonstrated the first mobile robot to be equipped with a voice. It was a large, clumsy, unbeautiful robot, smelling of machine oil and destined for the projected mines on Mercury. But it could speak and make sense. Susan said nothing at that seminar, took no part in the hectic discussion period that followed. She was a frosty girl, plain and colorless, who protected herself against a world she disliked by a mask-like expression and a hypertrophy of intellect. But as she watched and listened, she felt the stirrings of a cold enthusiasm. She obtained her bachelor's degree at Columbia in 2003 and began graduate work in cybernetics. All that had been done in the mid-20th century on calculating machines had been upset by Robertson and his positronic brain paths. The miles of relays and photocells had given way to the spongy globe of plantanumeridium about the size of a human brain. She learned to calculate the parameters necessary to fix the possible variables within the positronic brain, to construct brains on paper such that the responses to given stimuli could be accurately predicted. In 2008, she obtained her PhD and joined United States Robots as a robo-psychologist, becoming the first great practitioner of a new science. Lawrence Robertson was still president of the corporation. Alfred Lanning had become director of research. For 50 years, she watched the direction of human progress change and leap ahead. Now, she was retiring, as much as she ever could. At least, she was allowing someone else's name to be inset upon the door of her office. That, essentially, was what I had. I had a long list of her published papers, of the patents in her name. I had the chronological details of her promotions. In short, I had her professional vita in full detail. But that wasn't what I wanted. I needed more than that from my feature articles for Interplanetary Press. Much more. I told her so.
The stories in this book inspired the 2004 movie IRobot, starring Will Smith. Now, I do want to point out that these stories do not follow any of those plot lines. It was this collection, however, and the other novels that Asimov wrote about robots that formed the plot. Most famously, this collection of stories inspired the 3 laws of robotics. Here are those laws presented by Isaac himself.
The first law is as follows. A robot may not harm a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Number 2, a robot must obey orders given it by qualified personnel unless those orders violate rule number 1. In other words, a robot can't be ordered to kill a human being. Rule number 3, a robot must protect its own existence. After all, it's an expensive piece of equipment. Unless that violates rules 1 or 2. A robot must cheerfully go into self-destruction if it is in order to follow an order or to save a human life.
With these 3 simple directives, Isaac Asimov changed our perception of robots forever, and he became the father of robotics. If you want to know more about Isaac Asimov, I wrote a spotlight article on the blog site, and I will have a link to it in the show notes. Now, you can have the original stories in iRobot today. Here is what Audible has set up for us. They are offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. This includes free access to the Audible Plus catalog, which is updated monthly with new titles. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can get iRobot. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our first story comes from James Dockman from Place, New Hampshire. Now, this is our first story from Place and New Hampshire in general, so I had to look it up. place is an unincorporated community in the town of Farmington, which is in Strafford County, which is in New Hampshire, in these United States. It is located on New Hampshire Route 11, 4 miles northwest of Rochester. How about that? Here is James's story sent in via the website. Hello, Ron. I love scary stories and I love your presentations. It makes your show one I listen to each week. New Hampshire is rich with history, both alive and dead. I seek these out in hopes to experience them for myself. I often do, and here is one of those times. I have many more. The Country Tavern in Nashua is a great place for warm, hearty meals. We love it and know that it's a favorite among locals and those passing through town. Along with great food and ambience, there's some history that can't go without mention. Not just any history. This is one of the spookiest ghost stories ever from New Hampshire. The Country Tavern can be found in a farmhouse that was once occupied by a colonial family dating back to the 1740s. The home was built by Captain Ford in 1741. It was occupied primarily by his much younger wife, Elizabeth. Because the captain was often out at sea for extended periods, Elizabeth is said to have been often lonely. After one particularly long period away, the captain came home to find out that his wife had given birth. Knowing that he had been gone for at least a year, the captain realized that Elizabeth had been with another man. In a jealousy-fueled rage, he killed the baby. When Elizabeth learned what had happened, she came after her husband. Being stronger, Captain Ford stabbed Elizabeth, throwing her body into the well behind the house. The story should end there. It doesn't. However, this is where my story begins. My wife Mary and I went to the restaurant on Halloween. Our thinking was that if we were going to experience something, this would be the night. They held the restaurant open for dinner well past midnight, and we made sure that our reservation was one of the last. We had a wonderful meal of cornbread-crusted chicken, wild rice, and sautéed French onion green beans. As you would say, it was amazing. After dinner, they had the house band playing festive, spooky music, and a local ghost hunter was on site trying to talk to the ghost of Elizabeth. While this was all great fun, as you would expect, nothing happened. We asked for permission to walk the grounds. The owners simply said, "Knock yourself out." We went outside the old farmhouse. The grounds were meticulously kept up and still had that farm feel. We walked around to the back of the house where the well should have been. Today there is a mock-up of it sitting where it probably was. Mary quietly called out for Elizabeth. Nothing. We continued to walk and we both said at the same time, "Do you feel that chill?" While it was October, fall had not taken hold yet, and it was in the 70s. It felt much more like in the 50s. We walked a few more feet, and the temp went right back up. We tested this several times, and there was definitely a cold spot. In fact, it was a perfect circle just about the size of a well. I swear this is true. We were trying to figure this out when we both heard a moan. I felt a shiver go down my spine that felt like lightning. We looked around and a ball of light was moving towards us from the woods. As it got closer, we could see a vague human shape to it. Now this is where most people would run. Not my Mary. She started to move towards it. In her friendliest tone, she said,
"Hello, Elizabeth. My name is Mary."
The light responded with a sound that I can't describe very well. It was part moan, part scream, part angry, and even partly sad. Mary got to within a few feet of it, and then it vanished. Nothing else happened that night, and we were so dumbfounded by it all that we didn't record it, didn't take a picture, or collect any kind of proof. So you're just going to have to believe it or not. James Dockman, Place, New Hampshire. Well, James, I did a little background research and I found all kinds of support for your story. There were multiple tales of people in the restaurant having reported seeing Elizabeth wandering through the house, searching high and low for her lost baby. Some of the employees reportedly seen kitchen utensils and dishes moving around without anyone around. Others have simply reported an eerie presence, as if someone is nearby and watching them. The sad news is that the Country Tavern is a victim of COVID-19. The owners posted this on Facebook. To our friends and family, with the recent pause in our world and an uncertain future, my family and I have had much time to reflect and consider how best to go forward. The ability to bring our business back is likely many months away. Our business model was built almost entirely on the ability to gather in large groups. Until social distancing measures go away and the public is comfortable with that decision, we have a facility that would struggle greatly to survive. Our current plan is to close the business indefinitely as we ponder our future. Thank you for the great years. John. I couldn't find a listing for the place, so it probably isn't up for sale yet. However, the fate of this haunted restaurant is certainly unsure. Thank you for your amazing story, James. Our next story was sent in by @IDoDreams. That's all I got. I have no more information about him or her, but let's hear the story that I have titled, The Shadow Man Likes His Sheets. While growing up in my late teens, around 9th grade, our house had been bought out by the school district for an expansion of a new football field and gym. It was a new school, and I didn't even go there, even though we lived a block away. I was already enrolled at a high school, and my parents would rather have just drove me there than to deal with the paperwork. Besides, I really didn't want to switch schools. We moved to a house built in 1959, somewhat updated inside, almost an acre in land, and on a mountainous hill, but still about 13 minutes away from my high school. We were all excited because for the first time, we each had our own rooms. It was the second night there. I turned off the light and was looking up at the ceiling. All of a sudden, I feel my sheets start to pull away from me. I grab hold and pull back, but there's something pulling them. I didn't see anything at the end of my bed, but my sheets kept pulling away and I kept pulling back. Then it all stops. The sheets are free and I almost hit myself in the face. I sat right up in my bed, looked around trying to make sense of it all. My light switch is at the end of the bed, and I was not about to go that way, so I just decided to go to sleep. The next morning out in the hallway, my brother is telling my mom that something had pulled his sheets during the night. It pulled them halfway down to his waist and then stopped. I jumped into the conversation with my story and mentioned to my brother that maybe since they couldn't get my sheets, they went for him. We laughed and left it at that. One night, my brother was falling asleep when he got awakened by something grabbing him by his private parts. He mentioned he couldn't scream and the pain was wanting to make him cry. After what felt like an eternity, it released him and he stayed there in bed in pain. A couple days later, I was lying in bed and noticed the ceiling was starting to move. I was being dragged off my bed. I jumped up as quickly as I could and turned on the light. There was nothing in my room. It was about a month later. I got a cold shiver that awakened me. I'm not covered at all, and I looked around and I found my little sister had jumped into bed with me and taken all the covers for herself. I unrolled her and fixed the sheets. I happened to glance at my door, and even in the darkness of night I could make out the silhouette of a man wearing what I call a poncho-type cloak. He was just standing there. I froze and didn't know what to think, so I turned around, laid down, covering my sister and myself, and closed my eyes. Never saw that guy again, but we did have a guest staying over for a sleepover with my sister, mentioning she saw someone at their door. Nothing after that. What was it? Ron, do you know? At I Do Dreams. Well, I have to say, I don't know. In fact, I've never heard of shadow creatures with predilections with sheets. It truly is an odd story and an amazing one. Our last story for this time comes from Jeremy Plank, who lives in California. His story has a similar theme to the last one, which begs the question, are shadows obsessed with sheets? Jeremy has titled his story, I Swear It Took Our Sheets. Hey Ron, I have a strange short story for you. Shadow people are real, and if you leave them be, they just watch you from a dark corner. Call them out, and they'll steal your sheets. We had just moved into our new home and were told that the house had a history. So we were ready for anything. One night we had just gotten the kids to sleep and my wife and I had gotten into bed. I turned out the light, and plain as day there was a shadow figure in the corner of the room. I quickly turned the lights back on and the thing was gone. But we both saw it. The next morning we talked about it and decided that it was all our imagination. However, that night, there it was again. Now, I'd always heard that if you want a ghost to leave, just tell them so. So I shouted, "Hey, you beast, get the blank out of here, you peeping Tom." Well, the thing moved towards the bed, quickly I might add, fading away as it got closer. It appeared to have worked. However, the next morning, our bed sheets were missing. We both accused the other of doing it, but try as we might, we never found them. Also, our shadow figure never returned. Ron, I have no explanation for this one. Jeremy Plank, California. I don't know what to say except thank you, Jeremy, and I Do Dreams for your odd stories. Well, that's it for this time. If you have a story that you want to share, like Jeremy did, head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com. Click on the story submission banner, leave your story, give it a title, and tell me where you're from. I'll read it if I can.
Johnny, is this true?
As you know by now, I like to surf the internet to find the strange and unusual. I do this in the name of the podcast, but the truth is, I would do it anyway, even if there was no podcast. What you're about to hear is...
Johnny, is this true?
I will tell you a story and then ask the question, did I make it up or is it true? Your job is to decide. Let's get started.
Johnny, is this true?
Story 1. Packs of dogs in eastern Russia are inexplicably turning up pink and blue, and no one seems to know why. Can this be true? Or am I trying to fake you out? This is true. The bizarre phenomenon has occurred in and around the town of Zerhinzik, which is about 242 miles east of Moscow, near an abandoned chemical plant that once manufactured highly toxic hydrocyanic acid, which just happens to be a core ingredient in a once commonly used in a Prussian blue dye. Experts believe that this detail may explain why some pups are now blue through and through, including their excrement. Dmitry Kerkelin, head physician of the Zuachchita Veterinary Hospital, officially has said that it doesn't appear to have harmed the animals physically. Story 2. This story has to be made up. Things just don't happen like this in real life. A support dog just wasn't going to cut it. A guy was facing being fired, so he brought a support clown to work with him to provide comic relief if his boss fired him. Now, am I right? This is made up? Or is it real? Well, believe it or not, this one happened. Auckland, New Zealand ad man Joshua Jack said he sensed bad news when he received an email from his agency employer telling him that he needed to have a meeting with him to discuss his role. He said, "It's either a promotion or worse. I thought it best to bring a professional, so I paid $200 and hired a clown." News of the support clown stunt quickly spread when the New England Herald published a picture of Jack having a serious meeting with the emotional support clown and his two employers seated across from him. Jack did get fired in the end, but he said his bosses at the advertising agency were grateful he decided to spice up the meeting and could see the humorous side. Story 3. I guarantee you won't look at pickles the same way again. A woman in Houston, Texas, came to the conclusion that her husband was cheating on her, but she needed proof. So she hid a micro camera in a dill pickle that she put in his lunch, hoping to catch him. She knew that her husband hated pickles. Well, it turns out he was not cheating and actually ate the pickle. He found this out when he got home. The couple worked things out and waited a couple days to get the camera back, which, amazingly, was still working. Now, is this possibly true? Oh, heck no. I totally made this up and, as always, had a great time doing it. Come on now. Camera in a pickle? No way. Story 4. Give them a break. Police in Missouri deployed 3 squad cars and a motorcycle cop to ticket the 26 members of a bicycle club, issuing each a $100 summons. Why did they do this? Well, it appears the large group of bike enthusiasts didn't know how to brake properly. Now, this is what happens when you travel in bike gangs. But my question is, did it happen at all? Why, yes, it did. All 26 bikers were breaking the law. The cops waited at an intersection after residents complained and pulled the bikers over after they zoomed past a stop sign, failing to yield right of way. This was reported by the Kansas City Star. Failing to yield at a stop sign is a $100 fine. Well, that's it for this edition of Johnny Is It True? It was brought to you by Gladys Goodies, great treats for your pet to eat. If you have any concepts or stories that you would like to share for this segment, head on over to ronsamazingstories.com and click on the Contact tab. Are you ready for another story? This one is being brought to us by Gladys Goodies. Good treats for your dog to eat. They use all natural products with no sugar, preservatives, salts, or harmful ingredients. So check out their online store at GladysGoodies.com. That is GladysGoodies.com. And don't forget to use our very own promo code, RONS, to get a 20% discount on all of your purchases. That is RONS. Thank you, Gladys. Our featured story for this week is so good. When man first went into space, there was a real concern about what we would find out there. But did they really think about what would happen if they found nothing? That is what our story is about, and it is titled The Nothing Equation. It was written by Tom Godwin and is read for you by Mark Nelson.
The cruiser vanished back into hyperspace, and he was alone in the observation bubble, 10,000 light-years beyond the galaxy's outermost sun. He looked out the windows at the gigantic sea of emptiness around him, and wondered again what the danger had been that had so terrified the men before him. Of one thing he was already certain. He would find that nothing was waiting outside the bubble to kill him. The first bubble attendant had committed suicide, and the second was a mindless maniac on the earthbound cruiser. But it must have been something inside the bubble that had caused it, or else they had imagined it all. He went across the small room, his magnetized soles loud on the thin metal floor in the bubble's silence. He sat down in the single chair, his weight very slight in the feeble artificial gravity, and reviewed the known facts. The bubble was a project of the Earth's Galactic Observation Bureau, positioned there to gather data from observations that could not be made from within the galaxy. Since metallic mass affected the hypersensitive instruments, the bubble had been made as small and light as possible. It was for that reason that it could accommodate only one attendant. The Bureau had selected Horn as the bubble's first attendant, and the cruiser left him there for his 6 months' period of duty. When it made its scheduled return with his replacement, he was found dead from a tremendous overdose of sleeping pills. On the table was his daily report log and his last entry, made 3 months before. "I haven't attended to the instruments for a long time, because it hates us, and it doesn't want us here. It hates me the most of all, and keeps trying to get into the bubble to kill me. I can hear it whenever I stop and listen, and I know it won't be long. I'm afraid of it, and I want to be asleep when it comes. But I'll have to make it soon, because I have only 20 sleeping pills left, and if—" The sentence was never finished. According to the temperature recording instruments in the bubble, his body ceased radiating heat that same night. The bubble was cleaned, fumigated, and inspected inside and out. No sign of any inimical entity or force could be found. Silverman was Horn's replacement. When the cruiser returned 6 months later bringing him, Green, to be Silverman's replacement, Silverman was completely insane. He babbled about something that had been waiting outside the bubble to kill him, but his nearest to a rational statement was to say once, when asked for the 100th time what he had seen, "Nothing. You can't really see it, but you feel it watching you, and you hear it trying to get in to kill you. One time I bumped the wall and, for God's sake, take me away from it. Take me back to Earth." Then he had tried to hide under the captain's desk, and the ship's doctor had led him away. The bubble was minutely examined again, and the cruiser employed every detector device it possessed to search surrounding space for light years in all directions. Nothing was found. When it was time for the new replacement to be transferred to the bubble, he reported to Captain McDowell. "Everything is ready, Green," McDowell said. "You are the next one." His shaggy gray eyebrows met in a scowl. "It would be better if they would let me select the replacement instead of them." He flushed with a touch of resentment and said, The Bureau found my intelligence and initiative of thought satisfactory. I know the characteristics you don't need. What they ought to have is somebody like one of my engine room roustabouts, too ignorant to get scared and too dumb to go nuts. Then we could get a sane report 6 months from now instead of the ravings of a maniac. I suggest, he said stiffly, that you reserve judgment until that time comes, sir. And that was all he knew about the danger, real or imaginary, that had driven 2 men into insanity. He would have 6 months in which to find the answer. 6 months minus— he looked at the chronometer and saw that 20 minutes had passed since he left the cruiser. Somehow, it seemed much longer. He moved to light a cigarette, and his metal sole scraped the floor with the same startling loudness he had noticed before. The bubble was as silent as a tomb. It was not much larger than a tomb. A sphere 18 feet in diameter, made of thin sheet metal and crisscrossed outside with narrow reinforcing girders to keep the internal air pressure from rupturing it. The floor under him was 6 feet up from the sphere's bottom, and the space beneath held the air regenerator and waste converter units, the storage batteries, and the food cabinets. The compartment in which he sat contained chair, table, a narrow cot, banks of dials, a remote control panel for operating the instruments mounted outside the hull, a microfilm projector, and a pair of exerciser springs attached to one wall. That was all. There was no means of communication, since a hyperspace communicator would have affected the delicate instruments with its radiations. But there was a small microfilm library to go with the projector, so that he should be able to pass away the time pleasantly enough. But it was not the fear of boredom that was behind the apprehension he could already feel touching at his mind. It had not been boredom that had turned Horn into a suicide, and Silverman into— Something cracked sharply behind him, like a gunshot in the stillness, and he leaped to his feet, whirling to face it. It was only a metal reel of data tape that had dropped out of the spectrum analyzer into the storage tray. His heart was thumping fast, and his attempt to laugh at his nervousness sounded hollow and mirthless. Something inside or outside the bubble had driven 2 men insane with its threat, and now that he was irrevocably exiled in the bubble himself, he could no longer dismiss their fear as products of their imagination. Both of them had been rational, intelligent men, as carefully selected by the Observation Bureau as he had been. He set in to search the bubble, overlooking nothing. When he crawled down into the lower compartment, he hesitated, then opened the longest blade of his knife before searching among the dark recesses down there. He found nothing, not even a speck of dust. Back in his chair again, he began to doubt his first conviction. Perhaps there really had been some kind of an invisible force or entity outside the bubble. Both Horn and Silverman had said that it had tried to get in to kill them. They had been very definite about that part. There were 6 windows around the bubble's walls, set there to enable the attendant to see all the outside mounted instruments and dials. He went to them to look out, one by one, and from all of them he saw the same vast emptiness that surrounded him. The galaxy, his galaxy, was so far away that its stars were like dust. In the other directions, the empty gulf was so wide that galaxies and clusters of galaxies were tiny, feeble specks of light shining across it. All around him was a void so huge that galaxies were only specks in it. Who could know what forces or dangers might be waiting out there? A light blinked, reminding him it was time to attend to his duties. The job required an hour, and he was nervous and not yet hungry when he had finished. He went to the exerciser springs on the wall and performed a workout that left him tired and sweating, but which at least gave him a small appetite. The day passed, and the next. He made another search of the bubble's interior with the same results as before. He felt almost sure then that there was nothing in the bubble with him. He established a routine of work, pastime and sleep that made the first week pass fairly comfortably, but for the gnawing worry in his mind that something invisible was lurking just outside the windows. Then one day, he accidentally kicked the wall with his metal shoe tip. It made a sound like that from kicking a tight-stretched section of tin, and it seemed to him it gave a little from the impact, as tin would do. He realized for the first time how thin it was, how deadly, dangerously thin. According to the specifications he had read, it was only 1/16 of an inch thick. It was as thin as cardboard. He sat down with pencil and paper and began calculating. The bubble had a surface area of 146,500 square inches, and the internal air pressure was 14 pounds to the square inch, which meant that the thin metal skin contained a total pressure of 2,051,000 pounds. 2,000,000 pounds. The bubble in which he sat was a bomb, waiting to explode the instant any section of the thin metal weakened. It was supposed to be an alloy so extremely strong that it had a high safety factor, but he could not believe that any metal so thin could be so strong. It was all right for engineers sitting safely on the earth to speak of high safety factors, but his life depended upon the fragile wall not cracking. It made a lot of difference. The next day, he thought he felt the hook to which the exerciser spring was attached crack loose from where it was welded to the wall. He inspected the base of the hook closely, and there seemed to be a fine, hairline fracture appearing around it. He held his ear to it, listening for any sound of a leak. It was not leaking yet, but it could commence doing so at any time. He looked out the windows at the illimitable void that was waiting to absorb his pitiful little supply of air, and he thought of the days he had hauled and jerked at the springs with all his strength, not realizing the damage he was doing. There was a sick feeling in his stomach for the rest of the day, and he returned again and again to examine the hairline around the hook. The next day, he discovered an even more serious threat. The thin skin of the bubble had been spot-welded to the outside reinforcing girders. Such welding often created hard, brittle spots that would soon crystallize from continued movement, and there was a slight temperature difference in the bubble between his working and sleeping hours that would daily produce a contraction and expansion of the skin, especially when he used the little cooking burner. He quit using the burner for any purpose and began a daily inspection of every square inch of the bubble's walls, marking with a white chalk all the welding spots that appeared to be definitely weakened. Each day he found more to mark, and soon the little white circles were scattered across the walls wherever he looked. When he was not working at examining the walls, he could feel the windows watching him, like staring eyes. Out of self-defense, he would have to go to them and stare back at the emptiness. Space was alien, coldly, deadly alien. He was a tiny spark of life in a hostile sea of nothing, and there was no one to help him. The nothing outside was waiting day and night for the most infinitesimal leak or crack in the walls. The nothing that had been waiting out there since time without beginning and would wait for time without end. Sometimes he would touch his finger to the wall and think, "Death is out there, only 1/16 of an inch away." His first fears became a black and terrible conviction. The bubble could not continue to resist the attack for long. It had already lasted longer than it should have. 2,000,000 pounds of pressure wanted out, and all that sucking nothing of intergalactic space wanted in. And only a thin skin of metal, rotten with brittle welding spots, stood between them. It wanted in. The nothing wanted in. He knew then that Horn and Silverman had not been insane. It wanted in, and someday it would get in. When it did, it would explode him and jerk out his guts and lungs. Not until that happened, not until the nothing filled the bubble and enclosed his hideous, turned inside-out body, would it ever be content. He had long since quit wearing the magnetized shoes, afraid the vibration of them would weaken the bubble still more, and he began noticing sections where the bubble did not seem to be perfectly concave, as though the rolling mill had pressed the metal too thin in places and it was swelling out like an overinflated balloon. He could not remember when he had last attended to the instruments. Nothing was important but the danger that surrounded him. He knew the danger was rapidly increasing, because whenever he pressed his ear to the wall, he could hear the almost inaudible tickings and vibrations as the bubble's skin contracted or expanded, and the nothing tapped and searched with its empty fingers for a flaw or crack that it could tear into a leak. But the windows were far the worst, with nothing staring in at him day and night. There was no escape from it. He could feel it watching him, malignant and gloating, even when he hid his eyes in his hands. The time came when he could stand it no longer. The cot had a blanket, and he used that together with all his spare clothes to make a tent stretching from the table to the first instrument panel. When he crawled under it, he found that the lower half of one window could still see him. He used the clothes he was wearing to finish the job, and it was much better then, hiding there in the concealing darkness where the nothing could not see him. He did not mind going naked. The temperature regulators in the bubble never let it get too cold. He had no conception of time from then on. He emerged only when necessary to bring more food into his tent. He could still hear the nothing tapping and sucking in its ceaseless search for a flaw, and he made such emergences as brief as possible, wishing that he did not have to come out at all. Maybe, if he could hide in his tent for a long time and never make a sound, it would get tired and go away. Sometimes he thought of the cruiser and wished they would come for him, but most of the time he thought of the thing that was outside, trying to get in to kill him. When the strain became too great, he would draw himself up in the position he had once occupied in his mother's womb and pretend he had never left Earth. It was easier there. But always, before very long, the bubble would tick or whisper, and he would freeze in terror, thinking, "This time, it's coming in." Then one day, suddenly, two men were peering under his tent at him. One of them said, "My God, again!" and he wondered what he meant. But they were very nice to him and helped him put on his clothes. Later in the cruiser, everything was hazy, and they kept asking him what he was afraid of. "What was it? What did you find?" He tried hard to think so he could explain it. It was nothing." "What were you and Horn and Silverman afraid of? What was it?" the voice demanded insistently. "I told you," he said. "Nothing." They stared at him, and the haziness cleared a little as he saw they did not understand. He wanted them to believe him, because what he told them was so very true. "It wanted to kill us. Please, can't you believe me? It was waiting outside the bubble to kill us." But they kept staring, and he knew they didn't believe him. They didn't want to believe him. Everything turned hazy again, and he started to cry. He was glad when the doctor took his hand to lead him away. The bubble was carefully inspected, inside and out, and nothing was found. When it was time for Green's replacement to be transferred to it, Larkin reported to Captain McDowell. "Everything is ready, Larkin," McDowell said. "You're the next one. I wish we knew what the danger is." He scowled. "I still think one of my roustabouts from the engine room might give us a sane report 6 months from now, instead of the babblings we'll get from you." He felt his face flush, and he said stiffly, "I suggest, sir, that you not jump to conclusions until that time comes." The cruiser vanished back into hyperspace, and he was alone inside the observation bubble, 10,000 light-years beyond the galaxy's outermost sun. He looked out the windows at the gigantic sea of emptiness around him, and wondered again what the danger had been that had so terrified the men before him. Of one thing he was already certain. He would find that nothing was waiting outside the bubble to kill him.
So what did you think about that one? Loneliness is and always has been the central and inevitable experience of every man. How we deal with it is at least as important as when it overcomes us. Thomas Wolfe said that, and our story bears it out. Our writer was Tom Godwin, and that story first appeared in the Amazing Stories magazine, December of 1957. Godwin published 3 novels and 27 short stories. His best-known work was The Cold Equations, and was adapted to radio for Dimension X in the 50s. He was also known to have written several episodes for The Twilight Zone.
J-E-L-L. Oh, the big red letters stand for the Jell-O family. Oh, the big red letters stand for the Jell-O family. That's Jell-O. Yum, yum, yum. Jell-O pudding. Yum, yum, yum. Jell-O tapioca pudding.
Extra good news. The makers of Jell-O have discovered a way to give you rich, luscious chocolate pudding far more easily and far more economically than ever before. With the new Jell-O chocolate pudding powder, you can make old-fashioned pudding, smooth, creamy, and chocolatey, just like the ones Grandmother used to make back in the good old days. Now you can have them again, and this is all you have to do. Just combine the contents of a package of Jell-O chocolate pudding with some milk in the top of your double boiler, letting it cook until it becomes smooth and thick. When the mixture has cooled, serve it in sherbet glasses. You'll have enough for 6 helpings, and that means 6 happy people. Jell-O chocolate pudding is so simple, so inexpensive, and so downright delicious that you mustn't delay trying it. Ask your grocer for Jell-O chocolate pudding, and if he hasn't put it in stock yet, be sure he orders it for you. Remember the name, Jell-O chocolate pudding.
That was episode number 487, and we did it again. My thanks go out to James Dockman, at I Do Dreams, Jeremy Plank, and Mark Nelson for the second week in a row for taking part in the show. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button makes us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.